Evolutionary.org episode coming your way, episode 612. Today we're going to do Evan, Centopani, and we're going to do a steroid cycle. And look, Evan's been around for a little while, and he's puts out some really good information. We're going to get over a lot of his history, his life, where he came from, social media influence, diet, training. We're going to speculate on a steroid cycle based on what we know he likes and what he's talked about. And he's been pretty open about that sort of thing as well. So let's slide right into it. And look, Evan was born in Connecticut in 1981. Growing up, I was surprised when I saw this, but he had a lot of obesity issues as a young child. And once he was 12 years old, he was already well over 200 pounds and very overweight for his age. So to counter this, he started to do a lot of jogging. He took up a lot of weight training, and this resulted in him cutting down 80 plus pounds. So right off the bat, when you're able to do that as a teenager, that obviously plants that seed in your brain of, wow, nutrition and exercise really does make a difference, and I should learn everything I can about this stuff. And I think that's one of the things that he realized, and he was able to really start studying this. So once he was in his 20s, he decided to get into competitive bodybuilding. He did 2005 amateur show, and he won the heavyweight class and overall title. Next year, he also won the NPC Junior Championships. The following year after that, he earned his pro card at the NPC National Bodybuilding and Fitness Championship. So he really, was able to use his knowledge of this stuff, and he was able to really put it to good use. So I have a lot of respect for that he was able to tap into that. So peak stats are 5'10", 260. And in the off season, he gets up to 300 pounds. And looking at the videos he does now, the guy is just absolutely, huge. I mean, his biceps are like humongous. I don't know, Mobster. It's like, it's pretty insane. He wears like he'll wear like a loose shirt, and like his shirt won't even be like a cutoff, and you can see the biceps like just hanging out of there. So he's a massive individual. So let's go over his competitions a little bit, and I'll bring you in, Mobster. So his pro competitions, he was first at the New York Pro, Flex Pro. Then he was fourth at the Arnold Classic in 2011. The next year at the Arnold Classic, he improved to third. Mr. Olympia 2012, eighth, which is incredible. IFBB Pro Tampa in 2013, first. Nice. 2013 Mr. Olympia 13th, which is still also incredible. You got to remember, that means you're the 13th best bodybuilder in the world if you get 13th at Mr. Olympia. Yes. Arnold Classic 5th the next year. Then he did an Australia Pro Grand Prix, got third, which is a fantastic showing. That's a tough competition. And then a couple years later in 2016, Arnold Classic Australia 5th, which is, again, an excellent showing. So he's still training at the famous Powerhouse Gym in New Haven, Connecticut. If you ever want to run into him and say, "What's up? I heard you on the Evo podcast. They did a show on you." That's where you can find them. And he credits that gym for taking him to the next level. And I see where that's coming from because, I've trained at many different gyms over time, and really the environment of the gym, the environment, the community, the positivity of a gym, being managed well is important. All that stuff factors in to a good gym environment, allowing you to push. One of the other things that's really impressive about him as well is he's got his bachelor's degree. So he not only focused on, I'm going to work on my muscle, but he does what I always talk about on the forums, work on your brain as well. Yes. So he completed his bachelor's degree. That's very, very important. And he has several relatives who are also well-known athletes, including an uncle who was a pro wrestler. So that's something I didn't know either until researching a little bit about him. So that's very interesting. So he has an athletic family, very well-educated family. And he's I like him. I like some of the stuff he talks about. We're going to get into that later on the show. But Mobster touched on a couple things on this.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'd say in terms of his competition experience, the New York Pro first, the Arnold Classic 5th, those two stand out for me, Steve. In fact, third place, the 2012 third place, those are the ones that stand out in my mind. Because if you are a New York Pro first, would include Big Ramy before we become Mr. Olympia. It's Nick Walker just this weekend as we record this show. If you make it there, then you've got a very, very good chance of playing very high in either the Olympia or the Arnold. And he has done. So you can't argue with those numbers at all. But I tell you what, and I told you, Steve, this in the pre-show, the standout for me, ironically, Steve, wasn't him being on stage. What was kind of what made him a bodybuilder, what makes him, and we're going to get into how he comes across now in a minute, was the way he was presented, him and Frank McGrath, in the animal pack, which is essentially a very nice vitamin product. They do other stuff, but that's they're probably their sales leader for years was the animal pack, and even arguably now, Steve, the Arnold animal cage, which they sponsor. So they had a series of black and white adverts, very gritty, raw, rough kind of stuff, old laminate wood on the walls and chalk on the floor. And these were all black and white. There was no color pictures. And these adverts were all over the bodybuilder magazines, UK versions, American versions, foreign language versions, you name it, right? And pretty much just these two. There may have been one or two others, but I think a couple of girls. But they were all like these fucking 6-plate squats and getting, ignoring the girlfriends. You can go to the gym and all that kind of sort of down in the trenches kind of vibe. And he was one of the athletes, along with Frank McGrath, that was doing this. And to be kind of weird, I think it was actually before he started making his name in terms of the competition stuff. What does incredibly well now, and that expands into the social media stuff, is how he comes across. And he, on a show that we're very familiar with, plus his own Centopani circles, he is all about now, Steve, probably post-stage. I don't think we'll see him back on stage anytime soon. Education, and motivation. That's come from those adverts, but also in his own personality, possibly even the familial influence with the uncles and his dad, etc. One of the videos I've seen in the past, I didn't look at it for this show, but I've seen in the past, is he has a basement gym, and he built the power rack, welded it and ground it and polished it up himself at a facility that his dad still works at. So I suspect there's a big influence of the hard work, getting your shit done, and being out there, being positive, and telling people how you can. I think the phrase you do is you lift others up, Steve. When you are above, you get to pull people from below, and you bring them up to your level. And Evan, for whatever reason, with the Ask Me Anything, the IFBB Pro thing, and his circles, is all about that kind of educational stuff. Most of his videos, I think there's very little in the way of fun, goofing around or whatever else, although you them in their buddies occasionally in the round table stuff having a laugh, but very much in the case of they'll do that, they'll be buddies, and then they'll really get into the people around them, the people that are watching, being lifted up with information, motivation, seeing how you can be these people sometimes you would have competed against and been rivals with in the past, and yet here you are, 3-4 fellas on a podcast, really going out there and pushing this stuff out there, Steve. I mean, Steve, for example, talks about, and I'll bring Steve in for this, you said about some of his articles being so good at full information, Steve. So what do you think on that aspect of what he's doing at the minute?
Yeah, let's get into social media influence. And, he's got, as Mobster said, he mentioned several of the things he was involved in. He also has a website, CENTOPANI.com, which is his last name. You can go there. It's got interesting articles, links to different things he promotes. Listen, one of the things I saw on his website, which I found very, very good, and this is something I've been writing about for years. I think I wrote my first article about water probably around fucking like 14, 15 years ago. So, and that article that I wrote actually went out to the big supermarket. I bought different brands of water and I actually tested each one. I wrote an article about it. And I think a lot of people were shocked because they had been purchasing a lot of these waters themselves, and they got shocked at the findings that I had. But he has a really good one that he put out where he ranked around 20 or 25 different waters, brands out there based on their quality. And that's good stuff. I mean, that's something that can prolong your life. That's something that can save you money. And that's good stuff. I wish more of these guys would put out articles like that to help others make smart decisions. You go to the supermarket and you buy a bottled water, but then that bottled water is just tap water, the same tap water that comes out of your faucet. So now you're wasting plastic. You're wasting.
Yeah, $3 or $4
Yeah.
for something you can get for free.
Well, you're polluting the environment with the plastic
Yep.
bottle, first of all.
Yep.
Second off, you're enriching a crook, and who's just
Yeah.
bottling water. It's silly. So that's really good about his article, that he shows you the different water so you don't waste your money in the process. And it's really, really important. So those are just an example of some of the things he puts out. So I really like that about him. Now here, let's get into his diet, and then Mobster, he's going to touch on his training. So
Yeah.
listen, he also puts out a lot of diet information, and this is a guy who grew up fat. Okay,
Yeah.
this isn't some skinny dude. And we got a guy like that on the forum. He's all IFYM. He's one of those IFYM people. The dude's like fucking skinny as a rail, and he can down a whole pizza once a week, and he's proud of himself. Dude, you're skinny. You can eat a pizza and it won't affect you. But how about someone who grew up overweight, someone who has fat genetics, someone like that? You're telling them to eat a whole pizza? No. So Evan's a guy, he's been there, done that. He was overweight. Then he got lean. So he can fluctuate his weight as he pleases through diet. So he's learned what to do. So I got a lot of respect for that. Evan's one of those guys I respect because he knows how to do it. And I've done the same thing too. I can fluctuate my weight up or down as I please as well, simply through diet. Diet is huge.
Yes.
So let's talk about his contest diet. It's super simple, it's efficient, and we're gonna go over it. So meal 1, 6 whole eggs. Boom. How simple can that be? Meal 2, 8-ounce chicken, 1/3 of a cup of macadamia nuts. Very, very good. Protein, good fats. Meal 3, 50 grams of iso whey, 2 tablespoons of peanut butter. Meal 4 is 8-ounce chicken, 1/3 cup of macadamia nuts. 8-ounce steak as your meal 5 with 2 cups broccoli, 2 tablespoons of olive oil. Meal 6, 50 grams of iso whey and 2 tablespoons of peanut butter. So that's this contest prep. And look, I mean, it's simple. It's a lot of protein. It's a lot of fats. It's the carbs are kept pretty low. So he likes to kind of do it that way, kind of lean out going into the competition. And that's been the strategy for most bodybuilders, obviously, today. They're big. Everyone's big in America as it is. We're big. We keep getting bigger and bigger. And then you lean up and going into your competition. So this is how he pulls it off. So it's simple, it's efficient, anyone can do it. Maybe on the protein power, for your average Joe, you want to keep in mind, be easy on that. A lot of you have digestive issues with dairy, so you want to swap something else in there, maybe some fruit or something instead. You could swap that in instead of the protein powder. But that's his diet, and that would work, on 99% of you out there. If you wanted to put on some good lean bulking, especially if you're on cycle or something, this would be a great way to do it. So Mobster, why don't you touch on his training?
Yes, I'm looking at his training now, and I made some notes here. So basically, what he's doing at the minute, Steve, is giant sets. And obviously, training can change through the year, but this is from the video. He was training back. And he talks about putting certain exercises in that. But the staples was a barbell row, deadlifts, and a dumbbell row. So that's 1, 2, 3 as a giant set. And he's doing these one after another. Okay, so giant sets, you really don't want to be resting in between. Same with supersets. The key is not just to go, as I sometimes do, Steve, from one exercise to another and then back to the first exercise, but I might have a minute or 2 minutes rest in between because I'm still moving some weight around. No. If you're a bodybuilder, you need to be moving quickly, 20, 30 seconds between each lift, because you still want to keep that pump. You still want the tension. So that's number 1. Number 2, and he talks about slower tempo. And we just did another show before this one where we talked about the same thing, taking the momentum out of the movement. He mentions, for example, Steve could easily do 3-plate rows, 4-plate deadlifts, sometimes more, big dumbbells, etc. But on the video, that doesn't happen. And he says, literally, if I slow this stuff down, if I take the movement, the motion, the speed stuff out of the way, I can use 1.5 plates for rows. I can do 2 plates, 3 plates for deadlifts. I can use a 100-pound dumbbell instead of a 150-pound dumbbell, and it fucking hurts. And it looks like it's hurting Steve. He's struggling to get through 3 rotations, 3 sets of this stuff. Sometimes, and this is where he might change things up again, and this applies just to the rows again, right? 8 to 12 reps, but occasionally he'll put in 20 reps. 20 reps is a motherfucking pump, but especially if you do that at the end, Steve, when you've done the time under tension, when you've done the lack of cheating, and you're really working the movement all the way down, all the way up, pulling your elbows as high as you possibly can, etc., working real hard on a contraction. And now you're going to do 20 reps when the muscle's already fatigued. Tell me that you're not going to feel the fuck out of that and you're going to see some sort of growth there, Steve. Absolutely. Something else as well, Steve. He mentions this in the thing that I watch. He says he's typically up at 4 o'clock in the morning and in the gym at 5 a.m. Now, with everything else that he's fucking doing, Steve, I can only imagine it's a long day. But goddamn, I think the earliest I've ever trained in my life was 7:20 in the morning. The idea of training at 5 o'clock, even with my sleep pattern, Steve, I just fuck that shit for a game of soldiers, to say the least. I mean, he does have a back exercises, Steve, and I'm sure, like I said, no one, including myself, Steve, any of our listeners will be training exactly the same all year round. So this is just a where he is right now kind of workout, not trying to be on the Mr. Olympia stage, but still likes working out, still goes to the gym at 5 o'clock. Trust me, you've got to love training to be training at 5 o'clock in the morning. You really have, because that's hardcore right there when the rest of the world's barely out of bed or awake. And again, slowing the stuff down. What do we keep seeing as that commonality, Steve, amongst these pros is getting the most that they possibly can out of movements, whether it's biceps in certain position, whether it's the maximizing the range or shortening the range as required to keep the muscle under tension, and so on and so forth. I've touched upon this, and I'll just finish on this particular part with this example. It's almost instinctive for some athletes to know precisely where the movement is doing the most damage to the muscle. And I mean in a positive way, not in a negative way. And to stay there and be in that position, for example, not locking out on pressing, not going all the way down at the bottom of the press, but just staying where the muscle's being worked, is painful. It's hard. But if you know that's where the work is making you grow and you can stay in that particular place, it's tough. The idea of some of the things he's done in the past in terms of losing weight makes me feel that that's probably where his head's at. And then he's seen his uncles and perhaps his dad being hard workers, doing the stuff that they needed to do to put bread on the table, and that's turned him into a hard worker. So I love these particular aspects, and I like the fact that he's explaining what he's doing in his video, and it comes across really, really well. Let's move on to the steroid portion here, Steve, because there's kind of 3 parts here, and I want to carry on all 3 of them. Right. So on one of the shows, podcasts, etc., that he's done, he talks about his first cycle, and it's typical, not unusual, especially for someone that was training back in the 80s and 90s, etc. You trained, sometimes you had what you had, and that's what you worked with. And we've talked about this on other shows. You've never had it so good. The accessibility now is unbelievable. But he talks about, for example, said it was ampules, not vials, and his first cycle consisted of 500 milligrams of testosterone in the form of 250 milligrams of Omnidren, as it was called then, and the same again in Sustanon. Now, I've seen him say himself that on his first cycle, he gained 25 pounds, but someone else that we're going to do a show on says talk to Evan and ask him, and they reference 30 to 35 pounds on his first cycle. That talks to me like a fucking hyper responder. That is an amazing amount, and arguably, of course, you gain your most on your first cycle as well.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that, I just want to touch on that. What's interesting is the Omnidren and Sustanon are the exact same thing. So it's a blend of 4 testosterone. So it just shows you on first cycles.
He didn't know what the fuck he was doing, man. He didn't know
Yeah,
what the fuck
so
he was doing.
this would have been if he was born in 81, let's say he did his first cycle, his early 20s. So this would have been in the early 2000s. And at that time on forums, people on the forums were not very well informed. And now the moderators, even in those
I didn't think he was informed at all, Steve. It was literally what the guy gave him, and he took it. I don't think he knew what the fuck it was.
Yeah, so I mean, it's important now. You guys listen to these podcasts. You know what Omnidren is. You know what Sustanon is, and if you don't, you can go back and listen to the videos, and we tell you what they are. But that just shows you he still had great results, even though he didn't know what he was taking and didn't understand what he was taking. That just shows you, number one, it's a genetic element, and number two, because of his diet knowledge from a teenager, he had been likely, just like me, studying this stuff for the past 10 years because he knew how important diet was. So he took diet very seriously, and he probably ate really, really, really good on this cycle, a lot of muscle building foods. and your appetite is sky high, so you're eating a lot of muscle building foods, 2-3 times what you normally eat. Maybe he was eating like 5,000-6,000 calories on some days. So obviously he had tremendous results, but much of those results were obviously water, and some of it obviously was fat, because muscle tissue, you're not going to build that much muscle tissue in one cycle. Really, the most muscle tissue you can build is 1 or 2 pounds of muscle tissue per year. That's what you're going to average. So you got to remember, most of your muscle is made of water, not tissue. So if we're talking about actual muscle tissue, it's different than actual water. I can put anybody on a cycle and blow you up 20-30 pounds, but it's going to be mostly water, because again, most of our muscle is made up of water. So I hope that makes sense. But yeah, obviously it's not a good idea to mimic what he just did.
No, no,
Also,
no,
I
no,
don't
no.
think he was running an AI either. I don't think if you mentioned that. So that would contribute as well. Obviously going to put up a hell of a lot of water. So, but that just shows you again that it's genetics, diet,
Yes,
training your
yes.
balls off, and he put on a lot of weight. And I'm sure for him, it was, an exciting time. But obviously, 10 cycles where you're gaining an average of 25 pounds, that's 250 pounds.
Yeah,
So
they'd
those
never.
of you who are shaking your head and say, Steve, you don't know what you're talking about based on what I just said, prove it to
If
me. Go
only.
run 10 cycles and put on
Yes,
25 pounds each and gain
yes.
250 pounds. You'll be the most muscular man in the history of
Ever,
Earth. And you'll
ever,
be,
yes,
yeah, good
ever.
luck with that. And let me know how it goes for you. Go ahead, Mobster.
Yeah, yeah,
Next.
yeah. So where we're thinking around competition time is hinted at. It was kind of weird. I think for all the information he puts out there, Steve, kind of weird that we haven't seen, or certainly wasn't easy to find, video or information on what we think he was doing in competition. But he has kind of hinted at certain particular things. So, for example, when we know that he's also straight away, we can say from the first cycle, as fucked up as it was, we know that he fucking responds really well to sus. So why wouldn't you continue to use something you respond really well to, Steve? But hopefully this time with an AI. So, for example, he's hinted at using growth hormone, and I've actually put here 100% because of the hint, because he said he doesn't do it now. So I'm going to get into that momentarily. I'm going to talk about, I believe, Steve, something at least 1,000 milligrams of test per week, and this is for competition. You're talking in by his own admission, 290. We're guessing 300 pounds off season, getting down to 260, 270 competition shape. So he's 270 now, Stephen. He's not in competition shape, obviously. So he's a big motherfucker. Tests would be absolutely in there in the mix in some form. And 1,000 milligrams is probably the least that we would see, but certainly for an athlete like Evan in that particular way, in condition, his shape, his genetics, and so on. Now, I've already said we know that he responds incredibly well to Sustain, and perhaps that might not be the best thing for a competition. But I could see him in the middle of a competition, and not in the last few weeks as you dry out, get ready for stage, but somewhere between 800 and 1,000 milligrams, Steve. And of course, it's a testosterone esters anyway. We know that. What about EQ and Winstrol drying out for competition? Look, with combination with everything else, one or the other, Steve, somewhere in the area of 600 milligrams. And I've made a note here to the effect of using Mastron for sure. And I'm going to go again. This is a big competition stack. It's not super crazy, but it's still kind of big in terms of the overall numbers. And I'm going to go with 300 to 400 milligrams total for that. And again, that would probably be more in the last part of competing. I'll address now, and I'll get to Steve to talk about this because we know who he's working with. So we can have, as we do now, Steve, as we've talked about for ourselves, access to pretty much anything there is. So you go, what would he be running now at 270 pounds? This is from his own mouth. I'm going to say at least, in fact, he actually said 1 cc of test a week. So we're going to say around circa 300 milligrams. And he says, but that's for the most part, but sometimes a little bit higher. I think a little bit is at least 600, 800, maybe even 1,000 milligrams of test at certain times of the year. So we're almost talking a high-end TRT dose, certainly cruising, possibly for life, maybe as a result of everything he's been doing for a long time, and maybe even just because he likes to be in shape, likes to look muscular, so on and so forth. And again, the higher numbers, I'll let Steve think about that as well in terms of what would we run if it was a higher number. I'll tell you something else as well, Steve. I can see, and this is arguably applicable because he's post-competition, because he would have absolutely killed himself in the gym to get into the condition that's allowed him to compete at a certain level, as we have seen already. So I would argue, Stephen, again, accessibility is there as well. Certainly BPC and TB500 in terms of the healing peptides for joints enable him to train harder at certain times of year to recover well and so on and so forth. And then again, and this is from the horse's mouth himself, on one of the things saying he doesn't like to use growth hormone anymore. So I'm saying no growth hormone. So what do you think about the competition cycle, Steve? And then more, what would he be running now, looking the way that he looks? What do you think?
Yeah, I'm just curious why there's no training there. And so I wonder if maybe he just forgot to mention it or what, because
It may well be in there, Steve. It's just that you and I, as I said, we do for the listeners' benefit, we do a great deal of pre-show research, and you go out there, and he's putting out tons and tons of information,
yeah.
and there's little hints and bits and pieces, but Tren never got mentioned. Now, it's entirely possible that he was using Tren. I'd actually argue that it was almost a given for a pro at his level doing it, and yet I have, in the show research that both of us done, he didn't mention it. That doesn't mean he's never used it. It's just that you would have thought it would have been hinted at, or there would have been some sort of
Yeah.
reference to it. So it's entirely possible, of course.
So yeah, I'd want to ask him that if we ever talk to him or whatever. And we do have connections with Evan, obviously, Mobster and I. But that'd be something I'd want to know, because I believe I it wouldn't surprise me if he didn't, but it would be hard to go on Mr. Olympia 2 years in trying to place as high as you can at Mr. Olympia.
Yep.
Obviously,
Maybe Arnold. Yep.
obviously Evan, knows he probably went into competitions knowing, yeah, I'm not going to finish in the top 3, but man,
Hmm.
if I can get top 10 or top 5 or top 6, that would be really good. And obviously you're going to want to push as much as you can. So I'd want to know if he really did avoid it and why he avoided it. Maybe he just doesn't like the way it makes him feel. Maybe it makes him feel too sick. Maybe it makes him feel too toxic inside. So that would be
Yeah, maybe
something
that's the only
interesting.
reason he doesn't like to mention it, just because of association, and maybe he thinks it's an ugly drug, and I don't want to talk about it in public. It might be just
Yeah.
something like that, and yet he's done what needed to be done for stage shape. Who knows?
So with HGH, I wonder why, because you see people as they get older, they're like, yeah, I want to take HGH, it's
Hmm.
the anti-aging properties and all that. So the fact that he's saying no, I don't like to use it anymore.
Do you
I
think maybe blow perhaps, Steve? Some people, and maybe
well, I
it's
was
just one
gonna
of the.
say maybe he's worried about the cancer risk, because maybe he's had, a history of cancer in his family. Maybe he has some close bodybuilder friends who were using HGH who ended up getting cancer issues. So I
I
think it
think
could have.
perhaps also there's the issue, and this would apply. You have to remember, listeners, he was heavy, he was fat, so there might even be an argument with. I mean, for example, I haven't mentioned insulin, and yet normally when you were talking about top level pro, you'd be talking about insulin, and again, it wasn't something that's come up in conversation. Certainly, he may have done, but
Yeah.
I just we didn't come
If
across it. So I'm
yeah.
thinking, Steve, for the fatter person, for the more obese or heavier person, that insulin might have, in combination with growth, might have been an issue for him specifically with his background, his genetics
Yeah, it
for
could have
being fat.
been because when you compete and you're running a lot of HGH, you've got to use insulin to get that blood
Yes.
sugar back down. So he was using insulin if he was blasting lots of HGH. We don't know that for sure, but I mean,
Hmm.
I can make that assumption, and he should do that, because not doing that and abusing HGH is not going to be a good thing. So maybe he didn't use insulin, and he's like, well, I don't like HGH. I ran too much of it, or maybe he's just like, fuck it. Maybe he's just running like 2 IUs of HGH, and so he doesn't even consider that running anything.
That's
It's hard
true.
to
That's
say.
possible.
And it could be the financial aspect, because HGH is expensive. Maybe he's like, fuck this, this is too expensive, and I don't want to use HGH. So a lot of these pro bodybuilders, they get free gear to promote the stuff. So,
Hmm.
a source might say, I'm going to give you this much free stuff per month. And he's like, no, I don't want to use that on HGH. I'd rather use it on Equipoise or Winstrol or Test,
Or
Sustanon, whatever,
peptides,
or Pat.
SARMs
Yeah.
now,
So it's
more
like,
specific to
yeah,
his requirements now.
like, why should I spend half of what you guys offer me on HGH?
Yes.
I'd rather just
Yes.
use these other stuff. So it could be, financial aspect too. So it's hard to say, but this is what he prefers, and that's how it is. I mean, so let us know what you guys think in the comment sections, what you think Evan is into. Let us know if we missed anything. Maybe you saw a video that he did, a few months back where he mentioned that he did like trends. So mention that in the comments, and we
Yep.
would love to hear from you, Mobster.
Yeah, I love how he comes across, Steve, and I love how in his competitive retirement, if not completely retired, he's out there putting out information and giving you guys the stuff you need to know, and being supportive and working with the crew at doing the same thing. And it's fantastic how they're coming across. They're very open with the circles. They're very open with the Ask Me Anything. I like the fact that these are retired / still competing pros. Are made up of both, and it's out there. And that's fantastic. Way more than it ever used to be in the past, guys. So again, great stuff from Evan. Fantastic doing that stuff, and an inspiration back in the day and to a lesser degree now. Please note, we are not doctors, and the opinions are ours. It's our view based on our experience and views on the topic. Our podcasts are for informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.